Before we start this episode, I'd just like to acknowledge the Yidinji people on whose land this podcast is recorded, as well as the other 70 traditional owner groups whose sea country makes up the Great Barrier Reef, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hello and welcome to Word on the Reef. I'm your host, diver and marine conservationist Tahn Miller. Today, we're finally diving into the long-awaited final chapter of a 3-part series, Fantastic Beasts of the Great Barrier Reef and Where to Find Them. This epic countdown began back in Season 1, Episodes 13 and 15. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend you go back and listen to those episodes first. Now, I know it's been a while, but trust me, it was worth the wait because today we are finally going to reveal the final top 3 coolest animals that you can encounter while diving or snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef and where to have your best chances of finding them. Joining me is the legendary Tahn Miller, Master Reef Guide with Wavelength Reef Cruises. Tahn has spent over a decade helping people come face to face with the reef's most magical marine life, so we couldn't ask for a better guide on this journey. I just need to note that in a classic countdown fail, I accidentally counted upwards instead of downwards, so our number 1 pick of the top most exciting animal to see on the Great Barrier Reef, which I will reveal last, is going to be at number 8. But that's not important. The important part is, this is a really fun discussion about amazing marine encounters. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Tahn. How are you?
G'day, Tanya.
So moving on to a really cool animal at number 6. The shark. So some people come out to the reef and say it's on the top of their list of what they want to see, and some other people will say it's the last thing that they would ever want to see.
Well, we've always got to ask the question, who wants to see a shark today?
Yeah.
And sometimes the room will be split, sometimes one hand will sheepishly go up, and sometimes the whole room, the hands will go up. It's always these primal fears, but part of our job as tourism industry staff is to help ease those fears and introduce them to these sharks. And reef sharks are the best entry-level shark to have an interaction with because 1, they're small, 2, they're living on the biggest smorgasbord on the planet, and most of these sharks, they eat parrotfish, or there's so many fish here for them to eat, so we're not even on the radar to them. They think that we are gropers and we want to eat them.
Yeah, absolutely. They are quite rare and hard to see on the reef nowadays, especially in some spots. If you're lucky enough to see one, quick take photo because you'll probably only see it for a short time and then it'll swim off because sharks are usually afraid of us. And like you said, on the shallow coral reefs where we're snorkeling and doing entry-level diving, we mainly only see small reef sharks like your white-tip reef shark. As the name suggests, it's got a white tip on its fin, or your black-tip reef shark. It's got a black tip on its fin, and they're usually smaller than a human. So they're not going to come over to us. They're usually going to swim away, right?
That's right, yeah. And these sharks, they've adapted to the coral reef. They've become smaller over time because that section of their population has found real benefit at reducing in size to hunt those prey items in amongst the reef. And the reef is safety. Animals live there because they have protection, and the sharks have had to come to the party, become smaller to dominate and predate in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of my favourites is the epaulet, the wobbegong and the leopard shark. Do you have any good stories about them?
Oh, yes.
The epaulet shark is one of the smallest ones in the ocean, and they are absolutely adorable. They're only maximum 90 centimetres long, but really long and skinny, and they're brown with black spots.
Yeah.
And they've got one main big black spot, which is to deter predators because it looks like a giant eye on this tiny miniature little shark.
Yeah. And their anal fins are really adapted, like they're very powerful and can use them to walk as feet.
When the tide gets really low, if an epaulet shark gets caught up on top of the shallows in a tide pool, it can actually last an hour walking on top of the exposed reef.
Out of water, and they do that by shutting down half of their brain And, I always make a joke with people play on their irrational fears that they can crawl up the beach into their hotel rooms, which isn't the case, by the way, but they have an immense ability to suck mollusks and bits and pieces, little gastropods on the reef. I do know a story about back in the days of our hero Steve Irwin, that used to pick up everything and we used to give it to tourists, and we don't do that now because we highly respect everything. It's been that way for over 15 years, but there was a time that people would handle things, and he did the Rex hunt and kissed it before he released it, and it sucked onto his lip, and it didn't release him for an hour. And again, he knows who he is, but
is he okay?
I don't know, but
people would have been like, that's a nice, interesting lip decoration you've got there.
Yeah, so it's a cool thing about their anatomy is that they have that clamping, that sucking to be able to do that, and they have small little teeth as well. But my favourite shark out here is the tawny nurse shark. I love tawny nurses because they're like a bit bigger. Their tail is just like a big ribbon. They can be over 1.5 meters long, just the tail, and they're super gentle. They sleep everywhere. You'll see them sleeping in the day. They've got, again, little needle teeth, and their snouts are actually very small for the size of their body. And I've actually seen them feeding on the giant clams, and they get in, even with the clam shut completely up, they can get in and tear little pieces of the clam, which unfortunately for the clam means its end, and then it takes a few hours for that clam to die, and the shark can actually jam its head in between the clam shells and force it open. And that will actually trigger a massive feeding frenzy of eels, predator fish. They come in and they feast. So some days you might see a clam, they come back and it's completely consumed the next day, leaving only the shell. And one of the main offenders is the tawny nurse shark. But they're super gentle, and they're just one of my favourite sharks.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so it's not humans that they're interested in. Whenever I've swum with sharks, they completely ignore us pretty much and continue doing their thing. I remember growing up, I was similar to anyone else that's ever been traumatised by watching Jaws or any other films. I was too scared to swim in the deep end of the swimming pool because I had visions of sharks coming up to get me. So I was as scared of sharks as the next person. But the first time I did my open water course, and then I did my advanced diving course, and I did my first ever night dive. You've got these underwater waterproof torches or flashlights, and you see all these little sharks zooming around eating fish. And the first time I saw an actual real shark in the ocean in real life, I was like, oh, that's not scary at all.
No, this is just another fish. There's this really cool night dive they went on maybe in like 2012, perhaps. It was actually for the coral spawning. We were on Bat Reef, which is unfortunately the reef where our beloved Steve Irwin met his end. And we were in a cave and we were looking at parrotfish. And for those of you that don't know, the parrotfish actually produce a mucus sleeping bag before they tuck in for the night. And that sleeping bag will trap in its electronic current, the signal that it puts out, and also trap in its scent. But if they haven't completely regurgitated that bubble properly, then they are on the menu for the night. And if a shark finds one shark, two shark, and I've actually been in a tight little cave with about 6 white-tip reef sharks, which are only about less than 1 meter long. And they completely annihilated this parrotfish in seconds. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit startled at the time, but within 10, 20 seconds, they were just back to normal, just swimming around. And I was like, whoa, that was an experience. And, they feed at nighttime. It's very unlikely you'll see a white-tip reef shark feeding in the daytime. But they're also responsible for keeping the fish stock healthy. They predate on the weaker fish. I think I've seen one grey reef whaler feed in the daytime, and it just literally swam up beside these yellow little blue-banded snapper, I think they're called, and it just like slurped one in. And all the other fish didn't even notice, but that must have been one of the sicker, older ones. And that keeps the stock healthy. It's just the way of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharks are a really vital part of the ecosystem. So even though not everyone in the world loves sharks, we actually really depend on them for a healthy ecosystem for every other animal that lives in the ecosystem. I mean, it's the same as lions in Africa or wolves in the USA. So it can be hard to explain to people why we need to love sharks and protect them, but sharks have a very important job to do in the ocean. So even if you don't love them as much as you love Nemo, they're equally important, right?
That's exactly right. And, they have good reason to be afraid of us. The statistics are crazy when you tell people that, but you're like 245,000 times more likely to be killed by the person sitting next to you than a shark that day. And that always gives everyone a little bit of occasion to look around the room. You see husband and wives look at each other on the boat. It's funny. And that's what it's all about, breaking the ice, introducing people to these creatures so they want to protect them in their life. They say it's like 120 million sharks that's killed every year. I think that comes down to like 125,000 an hour or something. Do the math, I'm not too sure, but...
Yeah, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I think you're just about right. Humans are killing sharks in droves, and it's something that really needs to be addressed because they are so important for the ecosystem. And yes, you are definitely more likely to die from a vending machine falling on you, or much more likely to die from a car accident. And something cool about some of the sharks we talked about, like the tawny nurse shark, the epaulet, and the white tip reef shark, is that they don't have to keep swimming to keep breathing. I think they can just be found lying on the sand sometimes, so they're really easy to find. Is that true about the tawny nurse shark, that they can lie on the seafloor?
They just love it, chilling out on the seafloor. You're more likely to see one 9 out of 10 times just sleeping on the bottom. But they do free swim when they wake up. But when they see us, it's like it's inconveniencing them, and they move to a different spot not too far away.
Another really cool experience I've had with sharks was at a shark feeding at Osprey Reef. Like Tahn said, the feeding of the animals is very tightly regulated. So don't try this at home, folks. Don't try feeding any marine animals. But there are some tour companies that have a license to have a controlled feeding of sharks in a controlled environment. And I was lucky enough to go out on one of those, and they had a big container full of a tuna head. And then one dive instructor wearing chainmail gloves goes over and opens the container and lets the tuna head out. And we just had hundreds of sharks coming in to eat it. And we just sit back in the safety of the reef and watch this show. And the sharks are not interested in the humans. They say that sharks can detect a single drop of blood in a huge, vast area of ocean. But in my experience, I've accidentally cut myself in the ocean. The sharks completely ignored it. They weren't interested at all. It's fish blood that they're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. There's who was the YouTuber that he did the experiment, and they took a bucket of fish blood and a bucket of human blood, and they put them in the water very close next to feeding sharks, and 99% of the time they went to the fish blood, not the human blood, even though there was more human blood in the water. And that's available on YouTube to watch. What's really interesting as well, and this comes from Richard Fitzpatrick, and one of the studies he was part in, like, they are so good at learning, these sharks. So I think with some of the species, they could detect boats that fish from 9 kilometers away, and they can identify with the sound of the boat. And if they can associate that sound with a food payoff, then they will follow that boat. I think one of the experiments that they did, and they put 360 cameras underneath both these boats, and they got 2 fishermen in their small like tinnies to fish very closely together, maybe a few hundred meters away. One guy would catch more fish and the other guy would catch less. And every time that they've rocked up to this particular site over this 6 months or so, they could count the sharks under the boat with the guy that was the better fisherman. So they're able to learn where the food is very quickly. So they are able to adapt. Like my boats that I work on, even though we have a fish feeding permit, we don't feed fish at all on the beach. And so we never see that many sharks, which I'd like to. And you can't feed them too. It's actually illegal on the Great Barrier Reef to shark feed. And the reason they can do it at Osprey is because I think that's actually officially off the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah. Anyone that's having the inkling to feed sharks, that's definitely not because they can learn very quickly to associate your boat with food. It's a really good idea, unless you're a fishing operation, to not feed sharks.
Yeah, and be really careful where you clean your fish if you are fishing. Don't clean your fish guts off in an area where there are tourists swimming. There are some areas where fishing and tourist swimming takes place, like Fitzroy Island, for example.
Yeah, it's a conservation park.
Yeah, please don't clean your fish dinner off into the water where people are swimming, because I have seen it before. Yeah, that's really interesting that you said that the sharks could actually learn to hear or recognise the sound of different boats, and they know which boat is going to produce the most fish, and they'll come and steal the fish off your lines. And that really helps to answer, I guess, another common myth where fisher people will often say, oh, the shark population's never been healthier. I see squillions of sharks every time I go fishing. They're a huge problem. They're stealing all the fish off my lines nowadays. But that's because they've learned to follow the fishing boats to steal the fish. Whereas when we go diving and snorkeling in a green zone where no fishing takes place, it's very, very hard to see a shark. I'll be lucky if I see one once a month sometimes. You know,
like I've seen one tiger shark in the wild, snorkeling and diving, which was awesome. It was a juvenile out of 14, 15 years. But I did a dive charter on a game boat and I seen one the first day.
Yep. So they know where to hang out.
Yeah. Like I've got friends which are fishermen, work in the trout fishing industry, and they tell me like the sharks are in plague proportions. They need to be culled. But it's really good that people like the associates of Richard Fitzpatrick and that team, or who he was quoting, that they have been doing the work and the think tanks are operating in the right space.
Another really amazing shark that you can see potentially on the Great Barrier Reef, but very rare to sight, is the whale shark. So they can grow up to 20 metres long, but they're completely harmless, gentle giants. They eat plankton, and they're really beautiful. They're dark blue and grey on top with white spots and a bit more light coloured on the bottom. And I have actually not been lucky enough, after 12 years working on the reef, I've not been lucky enough to encounter one on the Great Barrier Reef, but they are out there.
Definitely are.
Yeah, so have you encountered a whale shark or whale sharks on the reef?
I have been so very lucky to swim with a whale shark on the Great Barrier Reef, which I believe there's only a dozen people. It's a very small fraternity of people that have actually... There's been sightings. I think there was a cool one from the pontoon out of Cairns where it swam past this semi-submersible sub.
Wow.
Randomly.
So a bunch of people that probably didn't even get in the water that day, because we do get people, non-swimmers, coming out to see the reef, and they'll just go in a glass-bottom boat or a semi-submersible boat ride. Can you imagine that? Even if any listeners out there, you can't even swim, you don't even want to get in the water and go snorkeling, and you get to see...
That's incredible.
A whale shark.
And that was on the news, which is really cool. But the one that I seen was just swimming. And I actually swam with it with my boss, Jenny Edmondson. It was me and her. So, you know, Western Australia is famous for its whale shark swims. And people travel to WA, and rightly so, because it's more guaranteed and the people want that experience. And 15, 20 years ago, people would swear black and blue that we didn't have them here on the East Coast. But sightings are becoming more and more common. I think it's up. I just seen some statistics a couple of weeks ago from the marine park that there's been over 200 whale shark sightings along the Great Barrier Reef since sightings started to be recorded. But the amount of people that have got the chance to get in the water and swim with them is quite few. And I'm lucky enough to have had that opportunity. And I grabbed my camera because I luckily put it on charge. It was at the end of the day. So I put it back on charge, and so I was ready to go. And I got a cool sequence there. It's probably the hardest I've kicked in my life. For 25 minutes, I kicked because they move. And it doesn't look like they're moving, but after you're finning hard. And I use Mares Quattros, which in my opinion is the best flipper out there, especially when you got a kick for two people.
Yeah, I'll be seeking a sponsorship from Mares now that you've given them a good plug.
Definitely. Mares, where you at? So, yeah, especially for whale shark swimming, definitely helped that particular time and every other time. I'm on my third pair, by the way, over 10 years. And the thing about the Great Barrier Reef is that it's just so huge. And we have so many whale sharks here, and we're only beginning to understand how many that we actually have. And they have been tagged last year. They got this cool tag where they stick them on the top right in front of their sort of the nape of the back of their head, and there's a big sort of float. So the whale sharks don't actually have to come up to the surface to send a signal off. I guess it's only like 5 meters from the surface. It doesn't have much drag. So we are now collecting data on whale sharks on the Great Barrier Reef to better understand their movements and migratory patterns, because there's speculation that there is an eastern population. But if these populations crossed over or they circumnavigated the country, how epic would that be? You know, we definitely think that they move up into Papua New Guinea's waters, and we don't know if they go through the Torres Strait, but I guess it's a waiting game. But they definitely have food sources, and it's like following the money. You know, you follow their food and you're probably going to find them. The one I swam with was about 9 meters. I haven't got a positive ID back whether it's been sighted before, because behind their left pectoral fin is like a fingerprint. Every series of markings and dots are unique to each animal, and the particular one that I swam with was missing a bit off its tail fin as well. Like for some reason it had a little chop off it, so I'm always on the lookout. And yeah, just whale sharks it was one of my bucket list things, and to tick that off was pretty cool.
Wow. When was that?
Close to 2 years ago now. Yeah.
Definitely recommend all the viewers to go and check out Tahn's Instagram and see if they can... I assume you've got that footage on there.
Yeah.
So the fact that a whale shark can be up to 20 metres long and we still don't know how many of them there are or where they go just goes to show how mysterious the ocean still is and how much we still don't know, right?
That's right. It still holds many secrets.
I'm sure we could continue talking on about sharks for forever and a day,
but
let's move on. We're all the way up to number 7, so we're getting close. Number 7 on the top 8 animals. Manta rays.
Manta rays, the gentle giants of the Great Barrier Reef. 2 species, I believe, the reef manta and the oceanic manta.
Yeah.
They just found a localized population. Documentary is coming out soon. Again, Richard Fitzpatrick. So
he's getting a lot of mentions today.
He's getting a lot of mentions today. So he definitely knows where to put his time and money. But they've found not only a whale shark population, or an aggregating whale shark population with oceanic mantas, and a northern population of whale, whether it's Brutus or sei whale, I can't quite recall, that doesn't migrate to Antarctica. They think it may stay in the north. So that is at this very secret place called Wreck Bay. I believe it's like 500 to 1,000 kilometres north somewhere. They've just been up filming recently. But the reef mantas are up and down the reef. And I personally haven't been to Lady Elliot Island yet, but it is on my bucket list. But I also mentioned before that I had that really cool swim with the mantas at Heron. And it's just magic. How about you?
Yes. So manta rays, the giant manta ray, the oceanic manta ray, can span up to 7 metres from wingtip to wingtip. And the reef manta is slightly smaller, but they're still very big and really cool to swim with. An important thing to note is they don't have a sting. So they're not a stingray. They're a manta ray.
That's right.
So completely harmless. They're thought to live up to 40 years. And the way they move is very graceful. They'll often be performing somersaults and dives as they feed and interact with other mantas. And they eat plankton, which they funnel into their mouth using the flaps at the front of their face, which are called cephalic fins.
Yeah.
Which means head fins, basically, which they use to funnel the plankton into their mouth. But from a personal experience, I've had some truly amazing experience swimming with manta rays. Over 12 years diving and snorkeling on the reef, I've been lucky enough to see them on multiple occasions, but it's not something you see every day. I remember the first time I ever saw a school of manta rays, and the funny thing about them is they're so huge. I always thought I'll be lucky if I see them far off in the distance. And, you know, most other megafauna, like an elephant, you're going to hear it coming from a mile away. But because manta rays are silent, I was just swimming along and I turned around and there was one right behind me and snuck up on me. So it was
so awesome.
Huge. And then they just stick around. So it just stayed and we were swimming with them for hours. And that was actually on Briggs Reef near Cairns. And it was a totally freak occurrence, I guess, because we used to dive at Briggs all the time, and it was only after I'd been working there for a year that we saw this big school of manta rays. But one thing that people can do to maximise their chance of swimming with manta rays is Heron Island, like you said, and also I have been lucky enough to swim with them at Lady Elliot Island. The peak season for manta ray aggregation is in winter, so I flew down there with friends in August one year, which is like the peak time for the manta rays to aggregate at Lady Elliot Island. To get to Lady Elliot Island, the resort includes a scenic flight. So we flew over to the island, and as we were coming into land, we saw 50 manta rays just swimming around the island in a kind of like a conga line. And that's because they're gathering there to mate, and the female goes at the front and all the males sort of go in a train behind and chase her around. And she's doing flips and tricks to try and see if they can keep up with her. Like, come on, what you got? Can you do these impressive tricks? And then if any of them manages to impress her, then she'll let them catch her. So first we saw this from the plane, and as soon as we landed, we couldn't get down into the water fast enough. And we were there for a week, and every single day we were swimming with manta rays, and they aren't afraid. So they would be doing these flips and just swimming around the snorkelers, using us as traffic cones and doing little donuts around us.
So cool. Don't
touch the marine life. We all know that, but they'll come up and touch you.
Yeah, I've heard stories of, them getting very physical.
Exactly. So I absolutely loved seeing the manta rays at Lady Elliot Island, and there's also tons of other types of gentle rays, like eagle rays, which a lot of them have cool patterns on their back, like white spots, and many other different types of
devil
rays.
rays, pygmy rays. Yeah, love rays, spirit animals. Whether they got a stinger or not, I love them.
Absolutely. So you might have to go to a specific spot at a specific time of year to maximise your chance of seeing a manta ray. But on most reefs, even just on any tour off Cairns or Port Douglas, you can see a blue-spotted lagoon ray. It's one of the real common ones to see, as the name suggests. It's got blue spots, and they're usually like dinner plate sized, right?
Yeah,
and
small pizza. They
do have a sting, I believe, but basically just don't step on it or touch it, and they won't harm you. They'll
only lash out if they feel they're threatened, but most of the time a ray will choose flight over fight. You have to be very close for it to happen. I've been very lucky to have been diving and snorkeling with hundreds of massive rays, and I've got decently close. Like they can be quite trusting, but I don't think I've ever seen one flick its tail with its barb. I haven't provoked it, but I've always treated them with respect. But yeah, they are definitely capable of arcing that up.
So like any other animal that we've discussed, it's only in self-defense that they would waste the barb that they possess.
Yeah, we've seen a really cool ray sighting, which I logged on the Eye on the Reef sightings app with the marine park. Last year, it was called a melanistic ray, which is the opposite to albino. It's fully black. And that was it was a juvenile reef manta, so it was only wouldn't have been 2 meters across, so pretty small, because a reef manta will get to about wingtip to wingtip 4 meters. So that was pretty unique. And like you said, I've got colleagues that have been on the reef for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and I've never seen a manta. It's just like the luck of the draw. But I think on the Great Barrier Reef, you just got to be ready for anything.
Keep your eyes peeled.
Never be complacent. Like one thing that I always do is when my camera goes flat, I've learned to always put it on charge on the way home, because I wouldn't have captured that whale shark sequence unless I charged my camera on the way home. So it's a good practice that I always get into. Okay,
so very exciting moment. We've come up to the last one on our list, number 8, the whale. So we have 30 species of whales and dolphins at the Great Barrier Reef, but I dare say the two most famous are the humpback whale and the dwarf minke whale. The humpback whale, you can book whale watching tours and usually just watch it from a boat. But dwarf minke whales, you can actually book tours where you can hop in the water and hold onto a trail rope, and the dwarf minke whales will actually swim up to you and swim around you. What can you tell us about whales, Tahn?
To swim with a whale, for me, is like going to church. It is a biblical, spiritual experience, and it really, just the sheer size of them, even the small ones, there's just something about it. When they look you in the eye, they're looking into your soul. They're so incredibly sentient. It's just amazing. I fell into a situation that I never planned to be in, and that was when I first got my first job on the Great Barrier Reef. I came here as a guest. I did my open water dive course. I did my advanced course the next week on a different boat, which I ended up getting a job on, Poseidon, out of Port Douglas, which in my mind at that time was probably one of the premier dive companies to dive with on the reef.
And the rest is history, right? Because I have the same story. The first time I dived on the reef, I was a tourist or a guest. I did my dive course, and then 12 years later, and I'm still a dive instructor on the reef. The
reef is powerful. It's got this draw, this pull where, the weather on my first day was horrible, and it just didn't even matter to me that it was rainy or windy. It just transformed me. And when I seen the crew working, first of all, I'm like, this is awesome. Look what these ordinary people doing amazing things. And the diving that Poseidon was doing at the time, like the inward drift dives and outward drift dives off the continental shelf of the drop-off, to me was just like mind-blowing. And I thought, I should, and I'm going to do this. So I changed my whole life at that time, but that's not where the story goes. The story goes is I got my job. Like all jobs, you got to start at the bottom, which is washing the dishes. And so I did that for a bit, and part of that role, luckily, was you needed some water time, and then eventually I transitioned into the lifeguard role. So I was only a rescue diver at the time, and by the time June, July came around, we had the migration of dwarf minke whales. And no one told me, I had no inkling that part of my job description was to take paying customers in the water with whales. Like, it just came, I didn't even realize. And then when it happened to me, I was just like, wow, it's just such an incredible experience. And the dwarf minke whales are so quiet. They're kind of like your manta rays. They just sneak up on you. And, you know, back then, like the Agincourt Reef, which is just below the ribbons, or the start of the ribbon reefs, if you will, that was the hot spot for it. Now the hot spot is sort of up on the top of the ribbons. You know, you got to do the liverboards with Mike Ball and Spirit of Freedom and stuff. But for a time, the most northern part of the migration, as we knew it, was the Agincourt. And so the permits were given out because these whales, they approach the boats and they watch people. So they needed to be controlled. So as you mentioned, the line that was put out off the bow, very controlled, trying to produce and perform predictive behavior on our part to encourage more encounters. And over the years of working with Poseidon, I managed to, I think it was about 38 minke whales that I ended up swimming with. And yes, I did keep count. But that's not really relative, because some of the guys up north, they'll get like 10, 15 a day for 8 hours, where our swims were probably for 45 minutes. But I have this story where, like, everyone always asks you, what is your favorite moment of working on the Great Barrier Reef? And do you have one that's concerning whales before I tell mine?
No, you go first. Okay,
so sometimes you would get the opportunity to go for a swim off the boat, you know. So one of the places that I'd swim across the reef, I was on my own. Workplace health and safety will hate this, but I was on my own. I went out to the drop-off. I'm floating in pretty deep water just for exercise, because you've got to keep fit doing this stuff. And then out of nowhere comes this massive thing at incredible speed down the wall, off the drop-off. It comes underneath me and buzzes me, and it's a minke whale. So I'm about 800 meters away from the boat, and I'm on my own. And the whale swims past, and it turns and looks at me and then cruises off. It was like a jumbo jet banking. It's about 8 meters, 9 meters long, which I think is about fully grown for them. And then it disappears. I'm like, no one is going to believe that just happened to me. No one. And next thing I knew, about 30 seconds later, it came back, but at half the speed. So I'm out there having this experience with this whale, one-on-one. And it just stopped and just was swimming with me and swimming around me. Wow. And it didn't leave the visibility. And usually they're super shy. They'll come, they'll go. You might only see them once. Sometimes they'll stay for an hour. Like the guys up north, they get them for 10 hours. But this particular one, it came and it stayed with me. And I'm like, okay. I have to go back, but I want to stay with this whale. So I slowly started to swim back to the boat, but the deep way rather than over top of the reef. And long story short, I swam this whale all the way back to the boat. Wow. And then every single one of our 90 customers that were in the water at that time got to swim with that whale, and it stayed for an hour with the boat. So I swam at about 800 meters to the boat. We changed our whole run of the day. Usually we'd visit 3 sites. We did 2 so we could stay with this animal for longer. That type of stuff's life-changing.
Wow.
What's crazy is I dream about them, and when they start to migrate, they're coming soon, and I'll have whale dreams. It's bizarre. So if I have a whale dream, I'm just all eyes on the horizon.
Wow, you have that connection with the ocean and with the animals.
It's amazing.
Dr. Dolittle of whales. You can call the whales and they follow you.
I wouldn't go that far, but I definitely have been in the right place at the right time more than a couple of times.
Whale whisperer.
Observer.
That is so amazing. So yes, the dwarf minke whales, they do migrate up here in around June to August. So if there's any listeners that want to do one of those special tours where you have a very high chance of swimming with minke whales, that's the time of year you want to be investigating. And you will probably nowadays have to invest in a liverboard. That means a cruise where you stay overnight on the boat, because you have to go quite far up north to get to those hot spots for the whales. And you mentioned about humpbacks. Please do tell if you've had an encounter with humpbacks.
So the first thing that we need to consider and understand about humpbacks when they enter the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is they have an extra layer of protection. So unlike New South Wales and southern Queensland, you can't just drive up to them with your boat. You can't jump in the water with them. We really value every single one of these creatures. And, they come up here to give birth. And there's not really any one birthing ground. I know that the Whitsundays have just they've got an extra layer of protection now. Because there are a lot of, like, hundreds, perhaps thousands of whales that do choose the Whitsundays to give birth. And there are patterns, and there's some amazing observations being done by the dive industry, the tourism industry staff just last year down there. And I definitely recommend you check that out. But we do have whales that come as far north as up here, and even as far as Cooktown, perhaps further. I like to think that whales don't get pregnant all at the same time. Like, it's staggered, so you wouldn't think that they all gave birth at the same time. So the ones that get pregnant up here, maybe they're given birth further to the south. But there's so many people are on the ground studying whales, and they say the population's rising 10% every year. It's up, pulling a figure out, it's at least 50,000. Some people, I've heard figures of 80,000 being said. But what I also know is that not every whale migrates every year. So a whale won't migrate until it's about 15, I think. I heard someone say recently at one of the conferences. And as far as female creatures on the reef, the humpback whale is my number one. She's the best mum out there. She will be so dedicated. And if her calf's not strong enough, she'll push it up. You get under it and push it up to have a breath every 30 seconds, every minute, for thousands of kilometers if she needs to. And I think that's pretty cool. And when you see whales from a boat, like, we whale watch all the way up the coast, but when you see them at the reef and they swim past you at the reef when you're already in the water, it is one of the most incredible things that you can witness. Firstly, if it's a male, they're super vocal. And I know you're a musician, but have you ever been next to a massive speaker at a rock concert and you've just felt the vibration just rumbling through from the bass?
Yeah.
That's what it's like being next to a whale when it just goes whoop, whoop, the clicks. It is unbelievable. It's just the bond between every molecule in your body is just like every atom is just vibrating. And like, one thing they've done last year in the Whitsundays is they've got hydrophones on the boat so they can listen to the whales. And I'm going to do that this year. I've got one in the mail because our boats have speakers all over, and I can tap into that. And that's one of the plans I want to do. I think that will add extra stuff, and that may not happen every day. We might only get to do that once a year, but for that once, it's just like swimming with a minke. It'll be unforgettable. I personally would love to be able to see a humpback, jump in with it and swim with it. But what's really important, what we have to understand is they're here to calve. And a calf suckles like hundreds of liters of milk a day, and they have to use so much energy to get back. Like, a mother won't feed. They say, I think that they might. I think there's actually been footage last year of a female feeding around the Whitsundays, but previously we thought they didn't feed. And so they're using energy reserves. If you think that putting your child in the shopping trolley and doing the shopping and then getting back to the car and getting home is a stretch, imagine getting that calf back to Antarctica, which I think is like 7,000 kilometers, give or take. It's an effort. So imagine getting them all the way there and then you just don't have the energy. And that energy was spent swimming with some human, like some cowboy dive instructor up on the Great Barrier Reef. So we don't do that here. We value every single shred of energy that they have because we know that for the good of the species, they quite possibly will need that. And hopefully that sort of makes its way out into the industry. But to be in the water with them while you're at the site and to see them swim past. And I think Ocean Freedom had a really cool, out of Cairns here, had a really cool encounter where a humpback whale swam up to their boat while their guests were in the water at one of their sites just last year. Like, that's the chances of that is pretty slim. However, the population's growing. There is definitely a need to re-look at the permitting and how we interact with these creatures because they're big and they're heavy, but inquisitive as well. It's really important that we do everything we can, but the best way to protect something is to have a connection with it. And I know whale swims are happening in Harvey Bay and stuff like that, and I think that's awesome. But if everybody was doing it everywhere, I think we'd probably run into some problems. But I am lucky to have seen them underwater.
You are so lucky. I am still waiting for that day for me when a humpback will swim over to me. I've heard them on multiple occasions, but Their song can travel, I think, hundreds of kilometres. You can hear them constantly if you're in the water in winter. In Lady Elliot Island, for example, you just hear constant whale song. It's absolutely beautiful. I have heard them singing up here near Cairns at the right time of year as well, but haven't had one swim right up to me, and I think it's not something that you go and chase down, like you said, because if you happen to drive near a whale in your boat, you have to keep a certain distance and you can't jump in the water with it. So It's all up to the nature gods, and the whales will decide if it's your turn to see a whale, if they want to swim over to you. But luckily whales are inquisitive, so they often do swim over to humans if they're in the mood to investigate, especially the dwarf minkies, which are one of the more guaranteed ones to see if you book the right tour. And yeah, threats to whales, their population has bounced back massively since whaling was banned. Tens of thousands of whales were killed back in the day when whaling was allowed, but the banning of whaling has really seen their numbers bounce back, which is really amazing. But of course, whales are still facing threats like plastic waste in the ocean and changes to their feeding in Antarctica and in places where they go because of climate change. So we still need to do everything we can to protect them. And I think booking a tour to go and see these animals is a really good way to help protect them, because awareness, education, forming that connection makes you into another ambassador. As long as you're doing it with an eco-friendly tour company that practices all of these best practices that you've been talking about.
I definitely agree. And people struggle, I think, to grasp the size of the whole Great Barrier Reef. And it's 2,300 kilometres long. And tourism, which seems like it's everywhere, only visits 7% of the Great Barrier Reef. And out of that 7, it's not the whole reef. There are wide expanses of ocean and reef lagoon that these animals can travel through undisturbed, but it is important that when we encounter them that we do those best practices. And I think it's 300 to 500 meters that we keep, 300 meters, and then double whales are a different rule. Migaloo, the white whale, is definitely 500 meters from any vessel, but luckily the sound travels far away and we can hear them even above water.
Tell us a bit about Migaloo.
I personally haven't had the pleasure. I've seen some partially white whales, but Migaloo, they say there's 4 white whales, but there's a little bit of a concern over Migaloo himself. He hasn't been spotted in a couple of years. Has been as far as Port Douglas. I know a couple of friends of mine took their kids out of school and jumped in their tinnies and cruised out to see the white tail flute of Migaloo. This is one in a lifetime type of thing. But yeah, it's a albino white whale. And Migaloo comes from an indigenous language meaning spirit or ghost. And in fact, Migaloo was a common word that the indigenous peoples would describe, Europeans, Migaloo. So a lot of people don't know that. So yeah, any whale that you see, if you're in any boat or craft, you always err on the side of caution. They know you're there, they can hear you, and sometimes they might come over to say good day. And if they do, let them control the encounter. And just take care.
Wow, we have covered so many amazing animals today, so many amazing stories. You're definitely the best person to talk to about these animals because you've had encounters with every single one of the Great 8.
Very lucky.
Yeah.
But anyone can do it.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear from any listeners out there. How many of the Great 8 have you seen or swam with? Feel free to post your comments and your amazing stories and experiences over on the Word on the Reef Instagram. But for now, thank you, Tahn Miller, for your time today, for joining us on Word on the Reef. If people want to find out more about you or see some of the amazing footage that you get on your adventures at the reef, where can they head?
Mainly just social media, Instagram and Facebook, just under Tahn Miller. Follow along or have a little look. I just create these things because I think it's just a damn shame that I keep them to myself.
We're very lucky that there's people out there like you that can share these experiences with your camera, with the world. And of course, if anyone wants to go diving with Tahn, just head to Port Douglas and head out on wavelength cruises, I guess.
Thanks, Tanya. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.